It's about the impact of growing up in an emotional dysfunctional family and how you can heal from it. I suddenly was like, I'm relinquishing control in who knows my story, because I've always been very controlled about who knows what. I've always been very aware that some people might not accept or might judge. And the book coming out is me relinquishing that control. Anyone can go and get hold of this book. And I think the liberation of that made me think, actually, I'm not ashamed of being autistic and having ADHD. Yes, I'll be absolutely brutally honest. There are certain people I go, oh, I don't know how they will respond to it. But actually, that's their stuff. And actually, I'm really proud of who I am. And I suppose it's the first time I've said this. I'm proud to be autistic. I'm proud to have ADHD. It's me. It's who, that's me. That's who I am. And I think that's where my magic and my spark comes from.
And that's just given me goosebumps hearing that, because that is such a powerful thing to say to yourself. I mean, you are a coach and a mentor. You describe compassion and connection at being at the heart of what you do in your work.
Yeah.
But to hear you say that about yourself, and for somebody else who's listening to this podcast, who perhaps isn't at the point in their journey that you're at, and it's at the very beginning, and I said this at the beginning of the podcast about what we're trying to do here is to give other people hope, that your story becomes the light of that hope, doesn't it, on somebody else's dark runway.
Yeah, and that's why I've written my book. I can't not speak up. There's something in me that goes, I don't want other people to feel like I did. I don't want them to, I had a nervous breakdown in 2018, and I don't go into it in huge detail, but in fact, I probably downplay it. I underplay it. It's like, it was horrendous. And I even struggle now to think back to how I was then. It's almost like I'm two separate people, and there's a disconnect between them. I think there's always that fear of that one person who'll go say something negative. I could be about autism, or it could be about speaking up, but I still do it. So there's an inner determination of, yes, you can judge me, and yes, it still will hurt me. I mean, rejection sensitive dysphoria was a life-changing light bulb moment for me to read about that, because I am deeply sensitive. I'm a deep thinker. I feel things so incredibly deeply that it can hurt, but yet I still do it. There's something in there that goes, you can get through the possible negativity, because actually, like you said, it's, if I share my story and it helps one person, then it was so worth it.
And you talk about having years of ill health, both mentally and physically, which culminated in the breakdown that you're talking about in 2018. So what do you recognize then that are some of the things that you struggle with? Because you were talking about being a child and growing up in an environment that wasn't necessarily nurturing, that you described having to put all of that you describe about yourself into this box and internalizing everything. And all of that's got to go somewhere, hasn't it? All those feelings, all those thoughts, when you're not able to externalize that, when we're talking about trauma, has to go somewhere. And you feel it, you see it, your nervous system is dysregulated. So what do you recognize then that you struggle with? What are some of the things that you would say, yeah, this is me?
I know now that I became a huge people pleaser, that I would avoid conflict at any opportunity. In fact, I'm so physical that conflict, literally, I feel it in my body. I feel the stress and the anxiety of potential conflict. So of course I went through life doing everything to avoid conflict, but then look at the other person I was, who couldn't stay quiet. So I was probably considered, looking back, a bit of a troublemaker within work situations, because I was the one who would speak up. I couldn't not. And looking back, I think, I bet you I had a bit of a reputation as being like, why can't she just be part of the crowd? But I couldn't. Even though I put all those things in that box, and it all came through physically. Obviously, I had no idea that the physical ailments were linked to it. And that's been the revelation for me, is that connect between all of the things that were going on. I lived in my head. I had a physical body, but my body did not exist to me. I didn't feel in my body. I literally just disconnected, and my head was, I would just say, on all the time, just thoughts and judgment. Because when you're brought up in an environment where there isn't that emotional attachment, you don't blame your caregivers. You don't take it out on them because you desperately want them to give you what you want and need. You take it out on yourself. So I have been so hard on myself the whole of my life. It's making me quite emotional, actually. I'm not now. I've done a lot of work, but I've been so hard on myself. I've probably been harder on myself than anyone has been on me. And like you said, that comes out. But if you don't know that it comes out through physical ailments, you could potentially spend all of your life feeling ill. I mean, literally on a daily basis, I would wake up with a headache every day. I didn't know what a clear head was. I would get gastric issues. I would get migraines. There was so many things that I was getting. And it was like my body going, I'm hurting, listen to me. But I didn't know that it was hurting because of things that had happened or things that didn't happen. Because if there isn't that emotional attachment, it's just as much about what you didn't get as about what happened. So I didn't have that kind voice in my head. But yet on the outside world, I was the most compassionate person to everyone else. And I can't tell you how many books I've read throughout my life trying to work myself out. I went from one self-help book after another. I knew I was this sort of vibrant, magical person. Yes, who had struggles. Social anxiety was a big one. But I also knew that in the right environment with the right people, I was magic. I mean, I was on fire. I was mischievous. But I learned just to go, well, that doesn't work for people. Just be, so they tell me I'm quiet. Okay, I'll be quiet. They tell me I'm shy. Oh, I must be shy. And then I'd move on to books on being an introvert. And none of them were me. So it was this constant conundrum of, well, who am I then? And it was, I think because I grew up around labels, I was seeking out this, who am I? And I remember sort of chatting with my husband one day going, when you've been around people, do you go away and analyze everything and second question yourself? And he went, no. And I was like, oh, I thought everyone did that. And it was like the minute I could begin to vocalize what went on, it started to help. But it is that being able to disclose to somebody who can hear you and won't give a throwaway, probably well-intentioned comment that could make you close back up again.
Yeah. And for you, working with that therapist that you worked with then back in 2018 time, if you hadn't have got what you needed and you hadn't have got a throwaway comment, or that person hadn't have necessarily understood what you were going through, that lid could have gone straight back on that box, couldn't it?
And it would have done. Without a shadow of a doubt.
Where else do you hear these stories? And that's the difference, isn't it? Is that what we're talking a lot about here and in this podcast are the internal experiences of women who are late discovered. And unless we collectively talk about them, nobody sees it. Nobody sees what goes on behind the scenes at all.
No. And it's the same within families. I mean, there's a chapter in my book about speaking up and how the difference in who you speak up to and how they listen and how they respond is a massive part of whether you share again. Because just as there is shame, potential shame around saying you're autistic, because people have a very narrow perception of what autism is, especially in women, it takes so much confidence to speak up to one person. And I think how that one person responds gives you an idea of how safe it is to speak to someone else. And I felt so strongly about that. There is a chapter on that, and almost like processes you can go through before you actually start to share.